In his latest episode of GUI Challenges, Adam created this very cool compare component, comparing two images. That's a classic one, before and after. But this is created with very smart use of HTML elements, a bit of CSS, and a single line of JavaScript. So in this video, let's see together how to build this in your favorite page builder. And we will build it in bricks. I will use no specific plugins. Of course, I will use a bit of OxyProps and StructEasy to speed up the process, but you can create exactly the same thing using only bricks. I don't know yet how long this video will be because I'll go in the details so you understand exactly how it works and what's the CSS and the JavaScript behind it. You will find timestamps in the description, so if you need to jump to specific portions, you are welcome to do it. I have switched my builder to light mode, so everything is visible for now. So let's start by inserting a light dark element. So we have the same thing on front end. Perfect. And now let's add our component container. So I want my component to be full viewport. So I want a div that will use the full viewport. So we have a div, and for now I'm using an OxyProps class, but we will do things a little differently. You will see why a bit later. And first, to create this component, we need to have a good understanding of linear gradients and the linear gradients syntax. We will not use the bricks built-in UI tools to create a linear gradients because they are too limited for what we want to achieve. So let's open our style tab, go to CSS, and start writing some CSS. For now, I will use simply the root placeholder, and I will simply create a background, and my background will be a linear gradient. And this will be simple. We'll go from black to transparent. And that's it. We have a linear gradient from black to transparent. But I want my gradient to be horizontal. So in my syntax, I will add a direction. The direction can either be an angle or a keyword. I want my gradient to go from left to right, so this will be to right with a comma. And now my gradient goes from left to right. Okay, there's probably nothing new here. You already know how to create a simple linear gradient like this one. But what I want is not my black color fading to transparent, but I want a very sharp limit between black and transparent. I want it to be black and somewhere here become transparent. And to achieve this, we can use a fairly new syntax for linear gradients that's called multiple stop. Actually, let's start with the legacy way of doing things. We could say that we want black from 0%, then black at 50%, then transparent at 50%, and then transparent up to 100%. And now I have a linear gradient that is black, full black, solid black, up to 50%, and then transparent from 50% to the end. That's not an optimal syntax. That's why we now have the multiple stop, and we can get rid of this. We can simply say that we are black from 0 to 50 and then transparent from 50 to 100%. And it still works as expected. We can do even better because for the first color, the 0 is implied, so we can get rid of the 0. And for the last color in the gradient colors list, the 100% is implied, so we can get rid of it. We can have black 50%, transparent 50%, and it's still what we expect it to be. But then there is an even better way to do things, because if I want to move the limit, I need to change both values. I will have black 20, but now it's fading. So if I want still a sharp limit, I will have transparent 20. So once again, I need to write 20% twice. So what we will use is something called the color hint, and we will simply write that we want black comma, 20% transparent. So let's start with 50. So what this does is telling the browser that we want to start with black, that we want to end with transparent, and that the midpoint between our colors will happen at 50%. I still have the fading between the two colors. That's not what I want, but we will come to this in a few seconds. But with this hint, it's only a value. It tells where to do the transition between the two colors. So I can move the transition point to 20%, and the transition happens earlier, to 80%, and the transition happens later. So let's come back to 50. And as I want it to be a sharp separation, I can simply say that I want my transparent to 0. Okay, that's a shorthand combining the two syntaxes, the multiple stop color gradient and the color hint. And actually, that's a short for black, but you know, black 0 is implied because that's the first color, and transparent 0 to 100%. And this one will be black 0 to 50%. But this is not needed in this syntax, and the 100% here is not needed. Okay, so now that we know how to create a gradient like this one, the idea will be to use it as a mask. Because in CSS, we can define a mask, and a mask will use black as the alpha channel. Black will be visible, white will be invisible. And everything between black and white will manage the opacity. If you start to understand how the component work, we will move the limit between black and white in our gradient, and this will define which part of the image is visible. But of course, we don't want to have to change this limit by hand, okay? We want a smart way of moving it. So let's modify this and use a CSS variable. So this will be a variable. Let's name it pose, simple for position, and we will keep a fallback value of 50%. So we are back to the previous state with our linear gradient, but now we have a variable, and with this variable, for now, let's show you simply with CSS. If I give it a value of 20%, my limit will be 20%. If I give it a value of 70%, my limit will be at 70%. Okay, so let's create an element that will allow us to dynamically modify the limit between black and white. So let's get rid of this. And we will use an HTML element, which is the range element. So just to start with, I will give my div a display of grid. So I will be able later to position my elements inside of it. And I want to create my range element. So to create it, I will use struct easy because it will be much easier to create this way. And what I want is an input with a type of range. And I want also to give it a step attribute, so with a step of 0.1. Why? Because by default, a range element has a step of 1. It ranges from 0 to 100, which will be okay for us because we want to move our value from 0 to 100%. But increments of 1 will not make things smooth on the screen. So we will go to increments of 0.1. So let's simply create it and inject, and let's move my window. And now you see that I have an element. Unfortunately, I cannot use it in the editor because Bricks wants by default the element to be draggable. That's not what I want. I want to be able to act on it. So let's just wait for a few minutes. We will see how to achieve this. But what is sure is that I can simply by clicking change the value of my range element. If you want to see what struct just did, let's have a look at it. It created an element with a custom HTML tag of input, and it also did create attributes with a type of range and the step of 0.1. Okay, so first thing I want to do is to be able to slide my range element in the editor. For now, this is not feasible because, and let's bring my DevTools in, look for my range. And the reason I can't use it slide it is that Bricks is adding some classes in the editor to control the elements. That's why you are able to drag elements and reorder them. But this is not what I want for this element. And this is controlled by these classes, the Bricks draggable, the Bricks draggable handle, etc. So as I want control myself over my element, what I will do is to add another attribute, and I will manage classes by myself. So let's create a class attribute. Simply, I am managing my class. If I'm having a look at the element, there's no class anymore. Perfect. But I still cannot use my input. And this is because now Bricks is trying to drag the parent element, the div. So let's do the same thing for the div. I will add an attribute of class. And now the class is empty. So I have lost the effect of my class here. That's why I told you earlier that I would use an OxyProps class only for a moment. So let's give it an actual class name, and my class will be compare, for example. And now I can go to my CSS and replace root by dot compare, and I will add a block size. So the block size is the logical CSS property for the height. For people using left to right or right to left languages, the block size is the vertical axis, the block axis. But for people using top to bottom language, the block size will be the horizontal axis. So we are using the logical properties each time we can to have better international support for our website. So the block size, and I will use 100, and I will not use VH. I want to use VB, once again, the logical version of the unit for viewport block size and not viewport height. But I also want to use the dynamic one. So this will be 100 dVB. And we are back with our element. The dVB, the difference between VB, the viewport block unit, and the dVB, the dynamic viewport block unit, is mainly useful on mobiles where you have elements of the interface like status bar or toolbar that appear and disappear from the interface. When you use the dVB unit, you will always have 100 or whatever value you want, but in my case, 100 of the visible viewport. So it may be the full screen when no UI element is visible, but when we have a toolbar and a status bar, it will be a bit less than the full screen, but 100 dVB will always be the visible viewport. Okay, so hopefully now I will be able to drag the handle of my range element with the mouse. Let's have a look. And it works. Now I can use my range element in Bricks editor canvas. So now I want to link the position of the range to my CSS variable. And for this, we will need JavaScript. Not a lot of JavaScript, a simple line of JavaScript. But once again, you will see that Bricks is not making things easy for us, but let's go step by step. We will manage to have it working. So first, let's start by adding a code element. I have my code element, and in the content, let's get rid of what's there. Of course, I want to execute the code. I want to render without a wrapper, and I will add a script. And let's close my script tag. And what we want to do is to select our range element and to add an event listener, listening for changes in the value. And when the value changes, we want to update the CSS property. So we will need a little setup before this. We want to change our input range ID. So let's change the ID. And as we will use JavaScript, we must take care of the format of our ID. We will use a camel case ID, and this will be my range input. And notice that I am not using, as you can see often, and that's the case by default in Bricks, an hyphen, range hyphen input, because this would not be valid JavaScript. That's why I replace the IFN by a capital I. That's often, we call it camel case. And that's often how we name variables with this specific syntax in JavaScript. Just if you don't know, so this is camel case. If I did capitalize the first letter range input, this would be Pascal case. Of course, range dash input, this is the slug version. And if I use an underscore, this is the snake case. And by the way, this is the way we should write variables and functions according to WordPress coding standards when writing PHP for WordPress. But in our case, we are writing JavaScript, so we'll keep camel case. So this is my range input. Let's save our ID. And I will also modify the ID of my main element. And this will be my compare. Perfect. I have my range input, and let's make sure it's spelled properly. That's an I, range input, and we have our compare. Okay, so let's write our JavaScript. And something nice with JavaScript in the browser is that as the ID is unique on a page, we can directly reference an element by using its ID. So if I want to select my input element, you may think that we need to have a document.querySelector, etc. We actually don't need. We can simply reference the ID. So the ID is our range input with a dot, and we will listen to an event, and the event is on input. And when something happens on the input, we will call a function. And this function will simply assign a value to our CSS variable. We will set the value at our component parent element level. So this is our compare. And once again, we can use its ID to reference it. That's our compare element dot style, because we want to set a style dot set property. The property we want to set is the dash dash underscore pose. And we want to give it a value of range input dot value, but if we give it only the value, this will be a numerical value. We want a percentage, so we will add the percent sign to it, and this hopefully should work. So let's save. I will not test it in the browser because this won't work. It doesn't work here. It should, but it doesn't. We will fix this later. And oh yes, I misspelled the set property. There should be a Y here. So let's save again and check again. And this time it is working. If we check our DevTools and look at the compare element, we see the style with the CSS variable. And when moving the range input, the value is updating. Perfect. So this works, but it doesn't work inside of Bricks because Bricks is not executing JavaScript from the code element. I have opened a bug report on the Bricks forum, so we'll see what is the answer. Maybe this is following the security issues Bricks had, but for now it's not working, so we need to find a trick to have it working. So what we will do, and it will work for now, I'm not sure it will still work in the future, depending on what the Bricks team decides. But what we will do for now is to execute this one only when we are on front end. So I will ask you to follow me because I will use a bit of trick here. I will create an anonymous function by opening a parenthesis again, an arrow, and opening curly brackets. And I want that I want to check if I am in the editor or in the front end. And we can check this by looking for a specific class that Bricks add on the body element of the document. So if I'm not, so I will use an exclamation mark. If I'm not on front end, so not document.body.classlist.contains, and I will check if the body element contains a specific class that is bricks-is-front-end. And if I'm not on front end, I simply return and do nothing. And then, if I am on front end, I will add my event listener. So I will close my curly brackets. I will close the parentheses. So that defines the function. And now I will call my function with a pair of parentheses. This can look a bit complex, but I'm simply creating a top-level function and calling it immediately. This should still work on front end, and it's working as expected. But of course, it's still not working in the editor. And this is where I will do something tricky. I will copy this code and I will add a basic text element. This basic text element will have a custom tag of script. So please do this on test environments. Do this when developing, but don't do this in production. And I will paste my code. I will remove the script tags. And this time I will remove the exclamation mark. And this code, I want to execute it if I am this time in the editor. So if I am on front end, I simply return by doing nothing. It's not working yet, but we will save, refresh the editor, and hopefully this time it works in Bricks editor. I want to be sure that it also works on front end, and it also works on front end. Okay, so that's not the best way to do things, but until the problem is fixed and the code element can execute JavaScript in the editor, this is a way to have your JavaScript working in Bricks editor. So now that it's working, maybe, well, let's start using it as it is intended to be used as a mask. So inside of my parent element, I will add children element. I will add one first. So let's add a div with a tag of section. Okay, so here it is. And to this div, I will give it a class, and the class will be compare. I know people like BEM, so __ before. Okay, and let's give it a background. And now that we know how to use linear gradients, my background will be a linear gradient to right from deep pink to Rebecca purple. And it's not working because I didn't spell the color properly. There are two E's for deep pink. Okay, so now we have our gradient. But because of our display grid, they are on top of each other and I want to stack them on the vertical axis. So let's get back to my div. And this will be handled here. We have a display grid. And what we will add, let's use the latest CSS feature. We'll use CSS nesting that's visible in CSS. So I will say that the children and any children and open close curly brackets and my children will use a grid area of 1 over -1. This way, I'm saying that all the elements inside of my grid will use the same cell, the same grid cell. So that's a simple way to stack elements on top of each other. And in order to prepare for the following, I will say that each section inside of my compare element will itself also be a display of grid. And I want everything centered, so with the place items of center. And this is a shorthand for align item center and justify item center. Okay, so we have the first one. Let's duplicate it. And this will not be a before. The second one will be an after. So let's create the class compare after. And let's give it also a background of linear gradient to right from cyan to lime. It works. Okay, so now they are on top of each other, so we don't see the result. So as we are on the after, let's start with the after. So we have created a background, but now we want to add a mask. And for the mask, we will use what we learned about the black transparent linear gradient. So I want a mask, and the mask will be a linear gradient to right from black. We will use our CSS variable with a default of 50% to transparent 0. And we have it. We are viewing only half of our gradient. Let's copy this line and go to our before element, and we will add, but we will not add the same one. This time we will go from transparent to black to have the other way around. Okay, so now let's take care of our input because it's not visible anymore. We want it to be on top. We could style the input, but I will stay at my parent element level because it's up to you. But when I'm working on creating a component like this one, what I like, my preference is to have all of my CSS in the same place. You have seen that I have created classes before and after and defined CSS for these classes inside of the classes. That's not really readable code. It's much more readable, in my opinion, to have everything at the same place. So my personal preference would be to define these classes inside of the parent component. But let's take care of the input. And so we can still use nesting. So we are inside of the compare and we will target an input with a type of range and we will give it a Z index of 1. And now it's on top and I can use it and I can move the thumb and the gradient follows. And as it's used as a mask, you can see that we are masking both layers, the before and the after layer, according to the gradient position. Maybe let's add images. So let's go to my section and I will use Bricks native elements. So I will add an image and let's use an image from the library. Let's use this one. Perfect. And by the way, this image comes from the Transhumans website, where you can find open source illustrations. These are very nice illustrations. This was showcased in Adam's GUI Challenge video. So feel free to visit the website, pick some image, and there's even a shop where you can order prints because I think they are very cool. So let's use this one. Let's duplicate my element in the other section and use another one. Let's use this one. Okay. And now we have the two images, but they are a bit tall. So once again, let's get to our parent element, custom CSS, and we will target images inside of this element. And our images will have a block size of 80 dvb. Okay, so now we know that they will fit inside of our viewport. Okay, so that's working as expected. Very nice. But of course, this range element doesn't really match the design, so we will need to adapt the range element design. So let's continue with our range element. We did give it a Z index, so we will give it an appearance of none. Okay, so everything is hidden except the thumb. We will give it a background of transparent. We will give it a cursor of pointer. Again, make sure I spell things properly. And we will use a property that is the WebKit tap highlight color. This is useful for mobile devices with touchscreens where the user agent highlights or uses an highlight each time you tap the screen. So try it on your mobile, but as we want to handle it by ourselves, we'll give it a tap highlight color of transparent. Okay, so now we only have the thumb visible and we will need to style it. And this will need a bit more work because it's different depending on the browsers. We need to style it for WebKit browsers and we need to style it also for Firefox. So let's start with WebKit. So we will use the ampersand and colon. We will use the WebKit slider thumb selector. It's a pseudo element. So this will be visible because I'm using Chrome. So we will see immediately the effects and then we will style for Firefox just after. So we will give the thumb an appearance of none. So nothing is visible now. We will give it an inline size of 4 pixels. This will be the width of our separator. We will give it a block size of 100 dvb, you know the value now. And now we need to give it a background color. And we will give it a background color up to you, but as I'm using OxyProps, I will use my surface one. And surface one is a logical color that's white in light mode and black in dark mode. Okay, so my color is responsive. So this was for WebKit. So let's now take care of Firefox, and the pseudo element will be different. This time it will be mauve, range, thumb, and we will give it the exact same properties. Let's save and have a look on the front end, and we now have our compare component working as expected. I hope you liked this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned some things. As you can see, sometimes we need tricks to have things working inside of bricks, but we really can do anything we want in the editor. It's not only a matter of having the widest pre-made elements library. It's, in my opinion, most of the time making a smart use of the basic elements. And in our case, we have used only bricks div elements to create our container, our sections, even our input with a type of range, and create this beautiful compare component. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.